Hello, friends, fellow artists, and Art League family. This is William McMahon. I'm here on behalf of Art League Online. Today I'm going to be expanding on my last video and demonstrating drawing a hand in a more complicated pose. Hope you enjoy the video. All right, I am going to now be showing how to pose a hand in a more complicated manner. I'm going to do something like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the arc of the knuckles, as I like to do. And just be aware that the angle that you are observing the hand is slightly different than the angle that I'm observing the hand. But I'm going to be starting with the arc of the knuckles, as I like to do. Here I have my pinky dipped down lower. I'm going to block in the shape of the palm. Then right off the bat, whenever we're doing hand drawings, I want people to try to establish the angle of the wrist early on. And again, from this position, I'm leaning a little bit to my left, and we always want to be mindful of the fact that every person is going to be broadest at the elbow and narrowing towards the wrist, no matter what their body type is. Thumb is going to be about halfway up the palm. And then I'm going to come through and I'm going to establish my initial knuckles. And then even though I'm drawing from the palm side, I'm still going to have in my mind where these tendons are radiating from the wrist. Normally I try to start with the middle finger because it's the longest finger. In poses like this, when it gets more complicated, sometimes I'll modify that. So for here, the thumb is closest to me. And so I'm going to give myself a little bit of context for where the thumb is located first. And I'm thinking in terms of knuckle, bone, knuckle, bone. And I'm checking relationships like where's the top of my thumb compared to this knuckle. The single most important thing to keep in mind when drawing hands, in my opinion, is to consider each finger as not just a single finger, but as three sections or segments that fit together to create a one whole form. Here, bending down towards me, and then now I'm not going to be worried about drawing right through this finger, which is overlapping on the pinky, bending forward, foreshortened, so this is shorter, and then down. Now, after I get this bone structure established, I'm going to go through and I'm going to flesh in each one of the fingers. And I'm going to be mindful that if you see a finger more in profile, the top part of the finger is going to be flatter. And then the lower part of the finger is going to have more flesh to it. This is very important. This part right here, I call that the soft fleshy patch, and that's going to exist about halfway across the palm. Secondary patch on this side. Pieces fitting into pieces. This is the form that's closest to me. It's coming towards the viewer. I'm seeing the tip of the finger like that. At this point, I've given myself the information that I need in the pose, and I can re-reference it anytime I want. But to me, the rest of the drawing can largely be done out of principle. And in general, when I approach drawing, when I teach drawing, I try to think of drawing, when we're drawing from observation, as being a combination of observation and then principle. So we get information down that I need to figure out my structure. Principle type stuff is going to be establishing a light source. I'm going to go through, I'm going to soften down the transitions between the fingers, add a little webbing in there. I'm going to try to really make it feel as though the fingers are fitting into the palm here. And then we're going to have arcs like that, bending in towards each other in the middle of the palm. On the side opposite the light source, edges, as I've been mentioning, are an opportunity to showcase texture and light source. So right off the bat, I'm going to come and I'm going to go darker on the side opposite the light source. And you'll see that the drawing will begin to take on a bit of dimensionality even without any shading, simply through paying attention to edges. And I'll go through and I'm going to nuance as well in this stage, work on long continuous marks. And now if I go and I minimize, and I'm going to go through, in addition to minimizing the side where the light source is hitting the fingers, I'm going to go through and I'm going to get rid of some of my initial marks of construction. Now I'm going to give myself some contour guidelines. Think of contour guidelines as line following form. I'm going to put these in very lightly, and this is just going to help give me some information when I go to apply my values. I will have some information in the type of marks that I can make to further inform the viewer about the drawing. I'm going to go through and do, now at this point, once I have my structure and my contour guidelines in place, I'm going to go through and I am going to be building my value range, adding in details. Details are things like fingernails, knuckles, tendons, veins, and really what you want to think about when you're doing hands, if you're going to get more nuanced, is to consider when you're drawing a fingernail to really differentiate. Let's see which one is my best fingernails. Yikes, it's a tough choice. You really want to think about flesh, then nail, then flesh, and breaking that up and staggering it into 3 sort of different levels. And as you observe, I'm trying to move around the drawing. I'm not just doing one finger at a time. That's to help keep the drawing unified and cohesive. And it's also to be able to kind of check it and make sure that if I'm rendering one finger with great detail and then that finger is out of proportion with the rest of the drawing, I'll be wasting my time. So now I'm going to start bouncing around and applying my value. Doing so with some hatch marks, following the contour guidelines that I put in place. And you don't have to there's also really, what you're trying to do to make a drawing appear more three-dimensional, more representational, is to achieve a range of value. Rich darks, bright whites, range of grays. I personally have always relied on hatch marks very heavily. I grew up reading, studying, and producing my own comic books. Then I got into printmaking, doing etchings, and these are very line-based forms of drawing, but they're not the only way. Actually, a lot of times what I'll do when I'm trying to make a drawing more fully representational is I'll go back in and actually use blending stump and soften some of my lines down. So casting that shadow, maybe even a bit of cast shadow from the pinky onto the palm. Again, we have a plan for our drawing. We block in our piece. We check the proportions. Once we're feeling good about the proportions, we give ourselves some contour guidelines and establish our light source. Then we go about creating our value range and our details. We don't want to be in any hurry in a drawing to push values or to go to details. Save those as kind of rewards for getting your proportions right getting your, and when I say proportions right, art is subjective. It depends on if you're going for representational. But once you get your proportions and your layout and your structure to a place that you're satisfied with, then we move into, like I said, creating our value range, which we can only do with the knowledge of light source. Using a Faber-Castell jumbo pencil, just thicker lead. Right now I've switched to a 6B. Again, as I mentioned in a previous video, we think of B. When you see the letter B, that's gonna, way to remember that is to think bold or black. It's gonna be softer, more like charcoal. It's gonna lend itself more to blending. And then the number in front of that is going to dictate what degree of that quality the pencil has. So for example, an 8B is going to be darker and softer than a 2B. If you're working with an H pencil, you can kind of try to remember that by thinking H for hard or stiff, light, more line-based, and again, a 9H would be much stiffer and lighter than a 2H. In fact, if you're drawing with a true 9H, it's probably going to actually look, it's almost going to be as though you're drawing with a sharpened piece of plastic. You'll almost mainly just be incising your paper. Concaves are an area to go nice and dark. Fingers fitting into this pad where you'll oftentimes get calluses if you're working, playing sports. We'll have this sort of dip right here. Different compressions of skin, little subtle rise and fall. And then again, to make this drawing look more polished, more three-dimensional, it's going to be about creating value range. The two most important values in drawing, white and black. Spectrum of gray in between there. Each finger, 3 sections or segments fitting together to create one. And then these can be in perspective. Fingers casting shadows onto one another. Concave mark there, differentiating where the wrist begins. And then what I'm going to do for my kind of final steps on this drawing, I'm going to actually use the blending stump just to get some softer grays, get rid of some of my initial measuring lines, just make the piece look a little bit more realistic. Bring some value into the middle of the palm. And all that I'm doing, I'm not doing it in a haphazard manner. It's all based on an understanding of light source. Again, as I mentioned in previous videos, the blending stump is a nice tool. You can get more precision in your blending. When it's dark, when you already have used it a fair bit, it actually can serve as a mark making tool. You can actually do marks with the blending stump. And then in addition to any natural oils that that we produce, for myself, using a blending stump is going to minimize, although not eliminate, the chances of jalapeno, Cheeto, or Cool Ranch Dorito remnants making their way onto my piece. However, if they do, I will firmly stand behind the statement that they are there as intentional compositional decisions. Come back, pop this edge again. Now that I have a little bit of value behind it, do a tiny bit of tightening up my erasing. Be even a little more minimal on some of the edges where the light source might be striking. Come back in with a few heavier marks along some noteworthy edges to further pop the piece. artists of any level, if people are wanting to make strides as a draftsperson, improve in the field of drawing, I believe that the single greatest exercise that an artist can do across the board is to practice hands. Please practice your hand studies. Thank you so much for checking out this video. Because of how important hands are, I may do another video on perhaps an even more ambitious and difficult pose for a hand. Thank you all so much for checking out the video. I hope that it was informative and entertaining. Please consider subscribing to our channel. We appreciate any likes, comments, and we'll see you next time. Keep drawing.